Our next speaker is Pheng CHEAH. He is a professor of rhetoric at the University of California, Berkeley. His work, the most succinct way of introducing his work is to remind you of a motto that was used by E.M. Forster in a novel called Howard's End. 2 words, only connect. Pheng CHEAH's work tries several kinds of connections. A single word would probably describe it. What does it mean to be cosmopolitan in the world today? He's the author of 2 wonderful books, and he has edited several more, which bring together a whole host of complex topics from the work of Benedict Anderson, the relation of the body to law, and the very difficult work of Derrida. Perhaps the best way of introducing him is to say that if you have read his books, as I have, with an enormous amount of admiration, you will realize 2 virtues. One, he makes complex and difficult interconnected issues accessible. Equally importantly, he keeps difficult things difficult.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. With me, you descend from the sublime of literature to the banality of academic prose. I have a PowerPoint, but I'm not quite sure now how actually to access it. The purpose of the PowerPoint is simply so that I don't need to read out a huge quote. Okay, so pronouncements about the emergence of an Asian century are part of a highly politicized discourse about a structural change in the contemporary world order. As a construction of Asian states and business and political and cultural elements in national and regional civil society, these pronouncements add a corrective final chapter to Hegel's Eurocentric teleology of world history. In this new ending, world spirit has rightly returned to the geographical site of its infancy, what Hegel called the Oriental world, or as you say in Cantonese, Pheng Sui Lun Bao Ju. Today, it is suggested the great civilizations of Asia have been revitalized. Their cultures are not merely compatible with prodigious capitalist economic development, but actually facilitate and enhance it. To think about the role of art in the contemporary renaissance of Asia is to reiterate a Hegelian theme, because more than any other thinker, Hegel gave the arts a paramount importance in understanding the direction of humanity's universal progress in a manner that justified the hierarchical relations between nations in different epochs of world history. The arts resolved a fundamental normative problem. The spectacle of violence and destruction staged by world history arouses, Hegel notes, in the spectator, a corrosive sense of futility and despair. And this is the quote on the first quote on the slide. When we see the evil, the wickedness, and the downfall of the most flourishing empires the human spirit has created, and when we are moved to profound pity for the untold miseries of individual human beings, we can only end with a feeling of sadness at the transience of everything. But even as we look upon history as the slaughtering bench on which the happiness of nations, the wisdom of states, and the virtue of individuals are sacrificed, our thoughts inevitably impel us to ask, to whom or to what final end have these monstrous sacrifices been made? Now, the final end of world history is freedom. But in a world where cosmopolitan order is a pipe dream, and national states exist in relations of power and domination, only one national spirit can be the bearer of the world spirit in a given epoch. The judgment of world history determines which national spirit this is by looking at whether a nation's spiritual products, such as the arts and the sciences, represent the highest achievement of freedom possible in that epoch. Because the arts of a nation allow posterity to discern its contributions to world historical progress, world history is a forum for the comparative evaluation of aesthetic forms. In this way, the arts justify the hierarchy of nations. Hegel says that in contrast to the world historical nation's absolute right, the spirits of other nations are without rights. Now, the Eurocentric logic of Hegel's philosophy of history is continuous with the ideological self-justification of European imperialism. My point, however, is that his view of the arts as the privileged medium for the expression of a nation's world historical achievements informs the argument that the arts are an important causal power in the development and cultivation of the national spirit, to its Bildung, to use an untranslatable German word popularized by Weimar classicism. This connection between the arts and national progress, whether we understand the arts as a symbolic expression of the degree of progress attained or as a means for the stimulating of further progress, tacitly underwrites all official projects of cultural development and exchange, ranging from the Goethe Institute, attempts by post-colonial states to foster and promote national literature and art, and to the ferocious establishment of Confucius institutes throughout the world. The neo-Hegelian understanding of the role of the arts focuses on their relation to the political sphere. As a symbolic expression of a nation's right over other nations, art functions as symbolic or soft power. The nation can command respect and recognition on the stage of international politics through cultural grandeur. Such cultural legitimation is visible in the last two Summer Olympics opening ceremonies. We learned that China invented printing, and the United Kingdom is the home of Shakespeare. However, with the penetration of the political sphere by economics, symbolic power undergoes a fundamental transformation. Instead of merely augmenting a nation's political force, it modulates symbolic and cultural capital and serves to increase a nation's economic resources within the framework of competitive global capitalist accumulation. The phenomenon of national cultural capital intersects in interesting ways with the development of human capital. The latter is, of course, initially a matter of individual endeavor. However, it is also argued that the individual accumulation of human capital occurs more prodigiously in nations that are rich in cultural capital, because the latter is a supportive infrastructure and stimulating environment. When my friend Professor Wang Dewei from Harvard delivered the Tan Lak Sai Memorial Lecture at the end of October, your Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Shanmugaratnam, introduced him by speaking of the need to cultivate intellectual risk-taking in Singapore university students and the important role that the arts and the humanities can play in this project. If we add to this mix the serendipitous confluence of the theory of the creative class that emphasizes the importance of creative thought to the global economy and the discourse of global cities pioneered by Saskia Sassen, we have the emergence of what I will call the political aesthetics of the global city. I use this phrase to refer to the following: the displacement of industrial capital by more profitable post-industrial forms such as international finance, bio and information technology, and the production of high-value specialized producer services has led to the rise of the global city as the site for the concentrated production for post-industrial capital. In order to first attract and then to nurture and reproduce the creative subjects required for this kind of production, a cultural infrastructure must be established to provide a stimulating environment favored by the creative class. First quote on the slide, what Richard Florida says is indigenous street-level culture, a teeming blend of cafes, sidewalk musicians, and small galleries and bistros, where it is hard to draw the line between participant and observer, or between creativity and its creators. Now, when government policy adopts such ideas, we have a process that is properly aesthetic in the broader sense. The creation of the global city involves a plasticity at the level of architecture and cultural institutions to produce an environment that appeals to the senses and to desire, fostering a cosmopolitan lifestyle, a vibrant artistic scene, or luxury consumption in order to pull in creative workers that can in turn attract global capital. Now, you clearly see this in the Hong Kong government's cultural policy, which aims to transform Hong Kong, second quote on the slide, into an international cultural metropolis with a distinct identity grounded in Chinese traditions and enriched by different cultures, where life is celebrated through cultural pursuit and creativity is a constant driver of progress in the community. Now, it is important to note that the production of global cities is by definition a competitive process. Cities are global only in relation to other cities. The top-tier global cities of New York, London, and Tokyo may form a non-competitive league, but other cities compete with each other to join the second tier, or to leap into the first. To take an example that is pertinent to the present occasion, Hong Kong's ambition to displace Tokyo as Asia's premier global city is marked by an anxiety that competition from other aspiring global cities in Asia, such as Singapore or Shanghai, may cause it to regress in the global hierarchy. And so obviously you see this is, these slides indicate the competition to be Asia's premier global city, anxiety that accompanies. So the question is, what does this mean for art? Cultural institutions that support the fine arts have a crucial role in the political aesthetics of global cities, because nothing symbolizes creativity more than the genius of artistic creation, and nothing indicates distinctive and useful and tasteful consumption more than the beautiful sheen of the unique art object. It is as though the transcendent or autonomous dimension of art, whether we understand this in terms of the disinterestedness of judgments of taste, or art as the embodiment of the absolute and the eternal in a sensuous material form, finds an appropriate phenomenal analogue in the formation of subjects capable of creative production and their participation in self-enriching consumption that gives them distinction. Small wonder then that ambitious global cities and aspiring ones have enthusiastically thrown themselves into the competition to remake themselves into the art hub of Asia, by building new museums, adding to their art collections through the purchase or donation of high-profile artworks, and by transforming themselves into centers for the trading and collecting of art. Qatar has built a museum of Islamic art housed in a building by I.M. Pei and the Arab Museum of Modern Art, and has recently added to its collection with the purchases of a Cézanne, a Roscoe, and a Hearst. In June 2012, the Swiss businessman and former ambassador Uli Zig made a controversial donation of the bulk of his important contemporary Chinese art collection to Hong Kong for the M+ Museum, which is headed by the founding director of the Tate Modern and is slated to open in 2017 in Hong Kong's yet-to-be-constructed West Kowloon Cultural District. Financial and economic news media describe this as a coup for Hong Kong that will further along its bid to be a world-class cultural center and a key hub of the Asian art scene. Not to be outdone, Singapore, Hong Kong's closest rival for the title of Asia's World City, is also getting in on the game. Sundaram Tagore, the owner of an art gallery in the Gilman Barracks, the centerpiece of Singapore's plan to be an art hub, observes that the Economic Development Board realized that in order to make Singapore a world-class city, they needed to establish more of an artistic infrastructure, end quote. In a comment on the opening of the barracks, the culture issue of Lux, a luxury lifestyle magazine promoting conspicuous consumption, notes that, and I quote, Singapore's contemporary art scene is flourishing as the city-state fights a determined rearguard action not to allow Hong Kong to run away with the crown of Asia's art capital, end quote. I have no doubt that the Asian century has led to productive ferment and creativity in artistic production. What I am concerned with here is how the art in question is processed by the techniques of post-industrial production. Its formatting, if you will, by the broader frame of global economic competition, so that art in the narrow sense feeds back into the aesthetic shaping of the Asian global city. In other words, the issue here is not whether artistic creativity is stimulated in the Asia century, how art is produced, and the kinds of art that are produced. It is rather what is made of this art as part of the plastic making of the global city, and what happens to art as a result. First, it is important to note that globally significant works of art are also expensive capital investments, the buying and selling of which is lucrative business. Hence, establishing an artistic infrastructure in collaboration with the private sector necessarily involves the commodification of fine art. A global art hub is not merely a site for exhibiting art, but also a marketplace for trading. This can lead to the neglect of popular cultural forms and local arts and crafts that are not recognized under the category of fine art as an object of investment and instrument of capital accumulation. And these kinds of criticisms have been made about Hong Kong's cultural policy. But more importantly, as part of the calculations of capital accumulation at various levels in Asian global cities, art as cultural capital has a radically different function today from art as soft power. The emphasis here falls on the purchase, collection, and display of art, its consumption, instead of its production. The semiotic structure of the consumption of art here needs to be distinguished from that in the West, particularly in those countries that were formerly colonial empires. In the latter, the collection of arts and antiquities from the non-Western and classical worlds in the British Museum or the Louvre were displays of imperial glory. They symbolize the literal possession of other parts of the world. The artistic contributions of non-Western civilizations to world history could be preserved for posterity by the Western nations that saw themselves as the bearers of universal progress. At the same time, these Western nations were also artistically productive and had their own contemporary art. Their capacity for originating art confirmed their modernity, which in turn confirmed for them their sense of superiority over other nations. Now, these two strands of aesthetic experience reinforce each other. The pleasure or awe aroused by the viewing of classical and non-Western art could inspire artistic creativity, as exemplified by John Keats's two sonnets written after seeing the Elgin marbles. The semiotic structure largely remains unchanged today. In contradistinction, the amassing of artistic capital by Asian global cities like Singapore or Hong Kong has a different significance for at least two reasons. First, access to the cultural legacies of the great Asian civilizations is rendered more remote by the separation of migration. Second, the weight of the received history of the arts is such that there is a relative lack of a culture of appreciating and producing fine art in these places. This reduces the likelihood of producing works of art of world significance. Indeed, since fine art itself is a Eurocentric category of Western thought, its appreciation and production in these Asian cities connotes, at least initially, the study and imitation of foreign forms and aesthetic standards. These limitations determine that it is more efficient to accumulate artistic capital by acquiring works of art of a global significance and establishing an infrastructure for their display and consumption than by the concerted strengthening of local artistic production. But once this cultural infrastructure is set up, it also promotes the local arts. While it is questionable whether artistic genius can be cultivated, the infrastructure can maximize public recognition of aesthetic value and make it easier for local artists to be noticed as valuable cultural resources. Locally produced art is integrated into the cultural infrastructure and smoothly converted into cultural capital. It is increasingly improbable that there will be any mute inglorious Miltons in the contemporary Asian global city. In short, within this competitive global framework of post-industrial capital accumulation, fine art becomes the highest form of a consumable commodity. For far from being depleted or extinguished by use, its repeated use only serves to augment its cultural capital. As a self-replenishing resource for the development of the creative class as human capital, the arts are an invaluable means for increasing the magnitude and speed of economic accumulation. In the Dialectic of Enlightenment, Adorno and Horkheimer exposed the deep untruth of the autonomous work of art by pointing to its nature as a commodity. The fact that its freedom from determinate purposes was based on the anonymity of market exchange. They suggested that in the contemporary age of cheap, mass-produced luxury goods, the work of art has renounced its autonomy. It has openly acknowledged its true identity as a commodity without any irony. What they could not foresee was that the new twist that art as cultural capital adds. For far from renouncing its autonomy and losing its aura, the identity of art with extremely costly luxury commodities in fact transfers art's aura to the commodity. Nowhere is this more visible than the current trend of incorporating galleries for the exhibition of art in flagship stores of luxury fashion boutiques. Currently, the Espace Louis Vuitton Singapore in the Louis Vuitton boutique at the Marina Bay Sands is exhibiting works by the Taiwanese artist CHEAH. The works explore the complexity of the sea. CHEAH has inscribed the Heart Sutra with its theme of the emptiness and ephemerality of existence onto various objects, such as seashells. The sea theme presumably resonates with the nautical motifs of the store's architecture, its interior design, and its marina location. But what is most striking is first the display of some of these works of art alongside pieces of vintage Louis Vuitton luggage in the gallery space. And second, the use of video screens on the top floor to show the latest runway collections in a manner that resembles the video installation art at the gallery level. Are the pieces of luggage just as ephemeral as the images and motifs of ephemerality depicted in the artwork? Or does the luggage have the same transcendent status as the pieces of art? Nothing are the latest ready-to-wear models displayed on the screen also works of art. Nothing is more ephemeral than the products of designer fashion, since they go out of style every season. However, when they are imparted with the beautiful sheen of art through association, it's implied that high fashion goods are beautiful forms that have a lasting value and should be collected like art. The dizzying heights of luxury consumption, where the standards of distinction at the expense of the consumed objects are continually driven higher and higher, have become essential simulacrum of the infinite and the absolute. I have one more paragraph. Can I just... Okay. This thorough instrumentalization of art in the Asian century indicates that we must critically rethink the transcendent character attributed to the work of art by philosophical aesthetics. This view of transcendence is based on the spatial motif of stepping over limitations, crossing boundaries, and overcoming borders. It leads logically to the conflation of transcendence with the erosion of territorial borders by globalization. In fact, globalization deprives us of a world because it levels off and closes down the structural openness to other beings that constitutes the worldliness of existence. The openness which gathers and holds together a world in which we exist. This openness is precisely what transcendence is, if we do not think of transcendence in terms of crossing over a line. Globalization makes us worldless because it restricts this openness by determining it according to the limited ends of capital accumulation. Yet these activities of accumulation must presuppose this prior worldliness, or nothing could take place. As Hannah Arendt puts it, and I quote, "Yet out of the conditions of worldliness that first appeared in the modern age grew the question, why is there anything at all, and not rather nothing," end quote. In the very singularity of its existence, art shows us what still holds the world together beneath and in spite of globalization. Thank you for your patience.